All right, good morning. This is, or I guess good afternoon or potentially evening, depending on where you're located. This is David Nedohin, Chief Customer Officer with ScopeAR, and welcome to ScopeCast Series Volume 1. The topic today is managing your remote workforce with AR during obviously the current situation of COVID-19. Of particular interest, a conversation with the Aggreko use case. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. One is that this is being recorded. An email will be sent to you after the Scopecast, so you can access this recording and be able to share it with others. So feel free to view that and share it. And number two, there is a opportunity for you to ask questions. So in the Zoom window, there's a Q&A panel. You can type your questions in there, and Walter and myself will be able to address them and answer some of them towards the end of the session. So without further ado, I think we'll probably start with some introductions to myself and Walter Davies. As I said, my name is David Nedohin. I'm the Chief Customer Officer and one of the founders of ScopeAR. I work with most of our customers, most of our larger customers in particular, in helping them identify use cases, how to be successful in their deployments, best practices, and essentially how to measure what they're doing and ensure success. And, it's my pleasure to welcome Walter Davis, Head of Talent and Learning Technology at Aggreko. So Walter has been a great evangelist of AR and new and innovating technologies in Aggreko. We've been working with Walter for the last year in implementation of our software, Workling software with Aggreko. Thanks, Walter, for joining us. This is great to be able to chat and just kind of have a conversation about what you're working on and sort of your experiences with it. So a little bit of an overview of the two companies for those of you who aren't familiar with ScopeAR. I'll just play a bit of a video. I think seeing it is a lot easier than necessarily myself trying to explain it all. So we'll just kind of run through that video, and I'll give you a sense of that. Looks like we'll try and start that there. So ScopeAR has developed software for basically sharing expert knowledge with workers kind of when and where they need it, and for a number of purposes, for training, for maintenance, obviously making sure that workers have those best practices and that you can follow them and measure they're done correctly. And you can do that through two different ways, and this video is giving you some visuals of that. One is you can connect remotely with an expert who could be somewhere else, share audio, share video, and be able to just show somebody what to do. Do things like draw with your finger, add arrows or add highlights that the other person's going to see. So an expert here working on their iPad, adding things in green, and technician being able to see those locked onto the equipment. So very, very simple form of communication, but extremely effective in making sure that you have best practices being delivered from an expert from a remote location, which, as we know today, is extremely important. Second part of WorkLink is around guided instructions, so step-by-step, predefined work instructions, basically replacing paper manuals and showing somebody what to do through animated step-by-step instructions. And Walter can certainly talk more to this as we get into our conversation. But really powerful when you combine the two use cases of showing step-by-step instructions and connecting with an expert that's somewhere else showing you what to do, which in our current situation is something that everybody's working towards. So a little bit on ScopeAR. Walter, I'll turn it over to you to provide a bit of an overview of Aggreko.
Great. Thanks, David. Yeah, so Aggreko, we're one of the world's largest temporary power and cooling providers. We operate in over 80 countries, 80 plus countries. I think it's 100 and a couple now. And we power, cool, and heat everything from rock concerts, major events like Super Bowl or Olympics is another big event that we do. Cirque du Soleil, also events that we do for them. And to manufacturing facilities right now due to the COVID-19, we're doing quite a bit for hospitals and providing cooling and power there. So we operate, like I said, we're a global organization, and basically we provide power, cooling, and heating in instances where companies need them. And usually, we provide power basically where there is none. So we also operate in very remote locations, which is another key that I'd like to call out in some of the services we provide. But yeah, we have about I'll call it about 7,000 employees across the globe. So we're a very agile organization. We operate very broadly, but we have obviously 7,000 employees. We're fairly agile. And we've been doing this for a while. Obviously, 55 plus years of experience. So we have a lot of know-how in the business, a lot of expertise, and we're looking to now leverage some of that expertise with new technologies.
Thanks, Walter. Great introduction. With that, let's jump into just conversation. I'm sure the audience here is very interested to learn about the learnings that you've found through your experience with augmented reality, through these types of technologies. Maybe you can start with telling us about sort of what was the motivation, or what is the motivation to looking at augmented reality as a way to deliver sort of these best practices. I know for you, it's particularly around training at this point. But how did you start with that, and sort of what was the motivating factor behind it?
Yeah, so probably one of the key I could say one of the key deciding elements between augmented reality and some of the other technologies that are out there, like virtual reality, was that we felt with AR we're able to reach a lot of our employees immediately, right? So we could deploy it to nearly any end device, right? Tablets, iPhones, etc. But for training and for training purposes, we could still offer an immersive experience. So we could replicate something that would normally be a hands-on physical activity fully digitally. And I'll give you an example of that. So one of the things that really drew us to AR was that we could take a physical, what would have normally been a physical activity on, like, to take, for example, one of our compressors, we could then replicate that experience, demonstrating, how that compressor operates, how it functions, airflow, specific procedures on that equipment, fully digitally in front of that person. And the reason I'd mentioned actually VR before was we looked at AR and VR, and VR, I guess one of the things that we struggled with that really pushed us to AR was the deployment factor. So we didn't really want to go down the route of managing a bunch of headsets and having those and bringing a lot of people then to the headset in order to go through that training. We wanted to be able to have that immersive experience, but have it in the field, and so that's where AR really shines, if you would, and it really adds that value. I guess as a couple of the another backgrounds as far as on the training side. So a couple of things we're looking to accomplish with this, by allowing us, anyone anywhere to have access to a really full scale product. I'd almost call it like immersive AR. I mean, the term term's up for debate, but that anyone anywhere could have access to that full product, walk around and do an activity. If it's 5 paces to the left to go grab that filter, they're going to have to walk 5 paces to the left to go remove that filter. So it's a really true full scale experience that we've been focusing on, and this, like I said, it's allowed us to then offer that up anywhere at any time, even if they don't have access to the equipment, which can be often the case. Obviously, customers will take priority. And especially for new hires when they're coming in, that equipment might not necessarily be immediately available, and it's tends to be a timing or a logistics element to coordinate that. And this helps us alleviate that, so they can just access it immediately when they need it. So that having access to that when they need it, that's going to help us reduce the time to knowledge, reduce that time to competency. So we're allowing, especially new hires coming into the business, go through this introductory training, familiarize themselves with the product before they've even ever necessarily seen it. And this helps them to be more prepared, more aware of that product, of its surroundings, of its capabilities, et cetera, before we invest in any further development, et cetera. This helps us expedite that process. The other thing is when having a product sitting there and sitting and dedicated to training can be costly, or even just having extra equipment can be costly. That impacts, again, so downtime of the product. And just said, even just being able to replicate the product, its parts and components, etc. There's also a physical investment savings in being able to go through that digitally, in something, like I said, that's lifelike. I've One of the questions I've asked individuals who've gone through it is, if they could tell me the difference between, the experience they're looking at and the experience that the experience that they're looking at in AR versus the experience that they would have gone through if I put the physical product right in front of them. And the only thing they can come up with, and usually actually when I ask them this, they tend to walk to the left, walk over to the right, look up and down, look around the equipment a little bit. And they're like, well, I guess the only thing I can't do is touch it, because I could do all the activities on it, and it's just like it's right in front of me. So yeah, it is, like I said, it's a very immersive experience we've been focused on. And I think that another factor that this brings into play is engagement, right? So one of the other pieces that one of the other things we're expecting to see is, and that we have actually already seen, is that people really enjoy, they light up when they go through this training. They want to go through, they want to explore. They actually tend to do even quite a bit more, or want to learn more about the product than we even already have in the scenarios. So I'll give you an example of some of these full scale experiences that we have. If we're showing that full product, they'll go through the procedures, and they'll go through learning about how the product operates, airflow, etc. But then they also go in, they even explore more on their own. They actually really want to even learn more. They want to see more. They want to know more about the product. So there's really a high level of engagement going through these experiences, and that's definitely something we've sort of expected to see when we started to look at it.
Yeah, that's, a whole bunch of good points in there. I think one of the challenges that comes up often, as sort of a bit of a hurdle for anybody who's starting with AR to figure out, is that I think they look at the end goal of being everything has to be perfect. You need to have wearables, and you need to be in, support outside environments. You need to do, it needs to be absolutely seamless. And what you've done is you've actually found use cases that are easy to deploy and manage today, particularly around training. And you can see even from this image that you've got one worker wearing a HoloLens in the right environment. You've got somebody using a handheld device based on the environment, and that there's best practices around it to have a starting point where you can be successful. What was there any other types of challenges and I guess pushback that you had when you started doing it, that sort of lessons that you've learned in terms of getting to the point where you are, of having this, we're doing it right now in these ways because we know they're successful? Is there any other lessons that you can share from that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that one of the lessons I've learned is that, before actually I go down having a conversation with anyone about utilizing this technology for learning, and I, give an example of, if we tend to get, obviously, we'll get new requests. Oh, this, that this product should be next, and we should focus on, the upcoming battery storage, et cetera, or another product, et cetera. But before I jump into that, what I've learned is that one of the main things that's helped us to get more, or you could say additional buy-in, straight and additional understanding right from the beginning, is to demonstrate how it works. So seeing is believing. I'd say that it can be sometimes difficult to talk to what they're going to see for those who aren't necessarily fully familiar with what AR is. So when I'm working with a new area on the product, I tend to show something we've done for another part of the business. So the compressor is an example. Before I go talk to those, product engineers for another product line, I tend to show them, well, look, this is how the compressor, for example, works, and this is what AR is. This is an example of how it can work. We're putting the product, into their real world space, right? We're not talking about buying goggles, and there is some confusion still out there between VR and AR. So the first thing I would always recommend is, there's going to be a different level of understanding. Even if someone's seen AR, even if they've used some of the experiences, might not necessarily clicked that that's an AR experience, that's AR. It's still new, and it's still new for us. So the first thing I like to do is give them a good example of an augmented reality learning experience. It doesn't have to necessarily be something you have in house. It can also be something that's even readily available, but that helps to then have a different kind of conversation when you start going down this road, and you'll find that that's a much more productive, a much more outcome centric conversation, rather than setting up something that rather than starting those conversations off with people with potentially different opinions of what AR is. And the other thing I would say for those who are looking at it specifically for learning, so is that, again, because you can see our use cases, this is a separate thing. Like we're using, these are learning experiences that we're doing without a physical product, right? So I think that's another element that like I said, it's all about, I'd say, calling out in advance and clarifying what the experience is going to entail, what it will and won't entail. I call out like there won't be a need for a physical product. There won't be a need for having that any actual component there. This isn't the on the product experience. This is something they can do anytime, anywhere, outside the office, in the office, in the depot, away from the depot, etc.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Walter. There's all sorts of ways to utilize augmented reality, and I think everyone or the initial reaction is that it's always you need to have the equipment and it's very complicated. But to your point, it can be, when you don't have the equipment, have a 3D virtual model sitting in that space that somebody can walk around, or if you have the equipment, you can overlay it on the equipment. So there is multiple ways to do it. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, exactly. And that's something like I said, if you are focused on like the specific learning example, try to, make that clear that yes, there's that operational, digital assistant, if you would, there's that on equipment. What we're focused on is a chunk that is different from that. And that we're not putting out something that's going to require the equipment. This is something that they can allow them to gain knowledge on, safely without a piece of equipment. They can go through activities that would have potentially even been harmful, but actually visually see them take place in a safe environment and demonstrate those in a safe way, preventing anything that could have been potentially hazardous to the employee or hazardous to the equipment had it been on the physical asset.
Yeah, absolutely. So turning our attention a little bit to what's on everybody's mind right now, of course, around COVID-19. There's a lot of customers that are now in that position of not really viewing something like AR or other sort of digital technologies as a nice to have, but more of a need to have. How has this sort of impacted things at Aggreko? And is there, has WorkLink or augmented reality provided some solutions to you, in dealing with this current situation?
Yeah. So, I guess I'll start with, a little background. Yes, one of the things, I guess one of the key things, obviously, that we found with WorkLink is that we can apply it in many different in different ways, right? So we're using it for learning. It works great for on the equipment, that digital work instruction, and it has remote AR support capabilities. So it has this blend of capabilities really that we can utilize. And yeah, because of COVID-19, obviously a lot of the work that we'd already started. So we've been down this road, I guess you could say, for a little bit, has been expedited. Really, we're seeing much higher demand because of COVID-19. And I'll call it out here both on the ops and on the learning side. So on the learning side, we've seen actually some additional use cases that we hadn't even thought of, to be honest, previously, now coming up. And there are even use cases that are actually even easier to do than the full product. It's actually just even focusing on just some of the components. So we've now been, because of COVID-19, forced to deliver a lot more virtual, obviously, classroom training. It's, we're not able to bring everyone into the classroom at the moment. And because of that, we don't have that. That means that participants in the sessions don't have access now to these components. So I'll give you an example. Someone going through, let's say, training on electrical power generation and going through alternator training on how power is generated. They don't have one of those large alternators just laying at home on top of that they can put on their desk to go through. But what we've been able to do now with AR is take that use case and actually deploy component and product specific training that can be complemented with virtual instructor led training. So now an instructor who's teaching that class virtually can have an activity that offers that student to go and on their phone launch a AR experience that will put that product in their home on their desk, and go through activities while the instructor's there with them, talking them through, this is how that component works, and this is how they work together, how it's assembled, disassembled, reassembled, etc. So even on the learning side, like I said, we've had additional use cases come up that we hadn't expected, that has sort of actually shifted us to have much higher demand than we had already had. We actually got quite a few products already on a wait list, to be honest, because the demand is, to be honest, so high right now. And on the I'll converge on the operational side. On the operational side, we've already been using remote AR and piloting it within the business, but a lot of this has been expedited now, and we're seeing that we're now starting to use it actively and using remote AR with customers and using it much more broadly than we'd had as an initial regional focus. That there's now a much more global approach to remote AR and looking at this technology and leveraging it to support our technicians and customers in the field and on site. And obviously, again, I think a lot of other businesses are going to be going through this, but because of the travel restrictions, it brings forth that challenge that you can't necessarily send all of your experts to those places that you would have normally sent them as easily as you would before. So as far as with travel wise, but what this is opening up now is we're seeing that there's again a lot more emphasis, a much higher demand now to expedite the work that had already been going on, and actually push that along a little quicker, and bring it over to a bit more, rather than a regional approach, a global approach. And again, where the other things that we hadn't gotten to yet, the digital work instruction, we focused on learning. We started with remote AR. The digital work instructions also now coming up. So we're seeing every aspect coming up within, you could say, the AR value chain, to be used here within the organization to help to allow those people who are less familiar with equipment to have this digital assistant, or even before that, they could allow someone who's less familiar to go through a learning experience safely, then go to the equipment and look at the equipment, get a digital assistant that's going to guide them through visually how to do these activities. And if they still have a challenge, they can remote support someone in who can, visually guide them through those activities. And so it doesn't matter if that person's, in another country, speaks a separate language. A lot of this can be accommodated through these visual support and this visual guidance. So I mean, to say that there's an uptake, yes, for sure. There's definitely been an uptake due to the outbreak. And I think that a lot of the work that we're doing now, we're going to see play out as maturing, even post sort of the epidemic here is gone. So yeah.
I think that makes sense. And many of the customers that we're working with, the message is that they've had to make changes and sort of adapt what they're doing based on the current situation, but that things won't go back to the way they were. I mean, there's digital technologies that's in place that they're recognizing are practical, they're easy to use, that they're measurable, and that this has changed the way we do business. So I think that makes sense. And the starting point for Aggreko was, like you said, training. But now with the digital work instructions and being able to connect to an expert through remote assistance, that now divides into supporting training with new employees, but also, like you said, maintenance and work instructions, with your customers globally. And we're seeing some customers start with that maintenance and work instructions first, and kind of move towards training. In your case, you started with training, moving towards those work instructions for potentially maintenance and standard operating procedures as the next stage. And like you said, it is about global scale, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's where we're really going to see value. I mean, we're seeing pull from all over from the business, but we've got some great operational leaders who stepped in and pulled it together at a global scale. And I mean, I like that you called that out on the starting with the digital work instruction versus starting with training. So one of the, I mean, that's really been actually one of the deciding factors on why we've leveraged WorkLink actually in particular, is because whether we're using those work instruction processes within training, or operations is building out a digital work instruction already for operations, that material can all be shared right within the platform. So one of the things that we're again going back to some of the learning experiences we've developed. So those learning experiences, some of the elements within that experience are around maintenance and repair procedures. Well, now we can pull out those maintenance or repair procedures, and they can be deployed as an individual on the job experience. So I think one of the things that we were grateful for, in going with with WorkLink and ScopeAR, was that we could leverage that content for the same content, with minimal to no rework for different situations. So yeah, I think regardless of where someone starts, I think knowing that you can leverage your existing content in different ways, it also helps and create more value. And I think that's definitely something that I would caution people to really consider, is how you can leverage that content that you're investing in creating.
Yeah, fantastic. No, that's exactly right. And it comes with experience. It comes with using the software, using AR, getting familiar with it, identifying that these are the areas that we can see value from today. This is how we're actually going to implement it and measure it to be successful based on our environment, our equipment, the hardware we're using, and then start to learn and expand from there. Moving on gears here a little bit, I guess we should probably look at a couple questions. There's some really interesting ones that have come in for you, Walter. So we've got about 5 minutes left, so maybe we can try and get through 3 or 4 of them, and before we wrap up. There's been a few questions around HoloLens 2 and headsets compared to tablets. What's your feedback, or I guess advice, when you're assessing the hardware side of it?
Yeah. So I guess in our first experience, we've been trying to lean to leveraging hardware that we've already had in place, and not to make not to have to make a huge hardware investment to deploy this and to deploy AR at scale. So our focus has been at scale, which does impact your hardware decisions. As far as HoloLens 2 versus tablet, I'd say we have had plans, which have now slightly changed a bit from COVID, to use HoloLens 2 in the classroom as sort of a shared experience and that hands-free learning experience. I mean, when you compare the experiences are, like I said, they're going to be different. They're going to look different. So like I said, obviously HoloLens, you're going to interact with your hands, and obviously on 2D interface, you'll do those same things on a 2D interface. The one thing I will say though, I mean, just to call out some of the advantages we've had with WorkLink in this aspect, is that the experiences that we've built that we're deploying right now on phones and tablets, we haven't had to rework to use them on the HoloLens. So we pick up I pick up a HoloLens, put it on, and launch the ScopeAR, the WorkLink app, the ScopeAR WorkLink app, and it's going to launch up that experience, so that when we're building the experiences, we can build it once and deploy to many, which I know isn't the case for every solution. So I say from the authoring perspective and from a content creation perspective, I'd be conscious of who you're going with, simply because, simply in not having to recreate something just because it's for a different device. And on the device perspective, I mean, like I said, we're not using HoloLens 2 actively in the field, but from our initial sense, like I said, it isn't a device that we do see some opportunity with. And I think that we see that opportunity really because we can leverage a lot of our existing content without having to recreate it. I think that's a really big focus, is getting the most value out of each step that we're doing and every activity we're doing.
Yeah, for sure. One question came in on connectivity and how you're managing Wi-Fi connections for use of AR, and whether it's cell, internal Wi-Fi, best practices around that.
Yeah, so I can tell you on the learning experiences side. So So we have different kinds of connectivity across our organization. I mean, as many people do that operate at a global scale, you're going to have probably the exact same challenges that we have. Um, so I mean, we don't have. There's only a connectivity requirement for our experiences from the for the initial launch or to download the experience. They're all available offline, so you can take them with you, which again was a big factor for us. So even under low bandwidth situations, as long as you have connectivity and in even under low bandwidth, you can still download that experience, take it with you, and use it at its full pace, its full capacity, if you would, offline. No lag or anything like that. So I'd say we haven't had to worry about the internet speeds and things of that nature to date, simply because we have that option for folks to take it with them. And once they load it once, then it's there for you.
Perfect. And let's finish up with one last question. I know we're going to run a minute or two over, but there was a question asked about if there was a single key learning that you should have known about at the start of your journey. What might that be?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think at the start, maybe a lot of this is because we probably started on our journey pretty early. But I think one of the things I would call out, I actually sort of mentioned earlier, was when you're talking about AR, to always be able to visually show someone what you're just talking about. I think that the seeing is in many cases, from what I've seen, is believing. You can I've had meetings where I've done slides and shown it and showed pictures and this is what it looks like, but it wasn't really until they've had it those people have gone away and said, yeah, okay, I sort of see where we're going, but it wasn't really until they had it in their hands and they could move around the product that they then realized, oh, it's like this, oh, it's actually the whole product, it's full scale. Like, yes, exactly, it's full scale. So I think one of the things I would recommend is putting it in stakeholders' hands early, making sure that they get a chance to go through it, fully understand what we're talking about. I think that will help to better allow them to help them better understand where you're going with the case and with this technology. Like I said, it is new. It is still it is still fairly new for some folks, and I think seeing is believing, basically.
That's great. Thank you very much, Walter. I really appreciate your time and sharing your learnings. I'm sure that there's a lot of attendees here who can take a lot out of your experiences and hopefully implement them yourselves. Again, this is recorded. Everybody that's attended will receive an email with it. If you have it, there's a whole bunch more questions that came in, so feel free to connect directly to Scope AR, and we can answer those questions. If they're for Walter, we can also filter them and send them off to Walter as well. But thanks again, Walter. Really appreciate it. Have yourself a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.